The day I graduated from MIT, 3 empty seats in the family section screamed louder than the applause. While I shook the dean's hand, my parents sat in a theater smelling of cheap powder, watching my sister spin. They called my graduation a small ceremony. 5 years later, when they stood trembling before what they were about to lose, that small ceremony became the first piece of evidence in the sentence they had written themselves. My name is Naomi Blake, and I am 22 years old. I sat in the center of the student section, a single gray pixel in a high-definition image of academic triumph. My fingers were raw from twisting the tassel of my mortarboard. A nervous tic I had developed somewhere between my sophomore year algorithm exams and this morning. Around me, the air vibrated with a specific frequency of joy that only exists at moments like this. It was a cocktail of relief and terror, shaken by the roar of thousands of parents who had flown across oceans and driven across state lines just to witness a 3-second walk across a stage. I told myself strictly not to look to the left. That was where the families were. That was where the reserved seating for the graduates' guests formed a kaleidoscope of Sunday bests, proud fathers holding camcorders, and mothers dabbing at waterproof mascara. If I looked, I would see the density of love packed into those rows, and then I would see the holes. The sun over Cambridge was unforgiving. It beat down on the white folding chairs, making the plastic hot enough to scorch skin. The great dome loomed behind us, stoic and indifferent, a massive eye of concrete watching us leave. I could hear the hum of the crowd, a collective murmur of, "We did it, and we are so proud of you," that created a wall of sound. It felt like a party behind a glass wall. I was physically present, standing right on the edge of the celebration, but I was not allowed inside the warmth of it. In my mind, I was running a split-screen simulation. It is a habit of mine, thinking in multiple windows. On the left screen was my reality, the heat, the smell of freshly cut grass and anxious sweat, the weight of the diploma cover waiting on the podium. On the right screen, playing concurrently in my head, was a scene happening 200 miles away. I knew exactly what it looked like because I had spent 80% of my childhood in rooms just like it. It was a small community theater in the suburbs, the kind with carpet that smelled of 30 years of dust and cheap floor cleaner. The air conditioning would be rattling. The lighting would be a warm, forgiving yellow, designed to make amateur productions look professional. My parents, Patricia and Howard, would be sitting there. They would be leaning forward in creaky velvet seats, their knees pressing into the backs of the chairs in front of them. They would not be checking their watches. They would not be hot or uncomfortable. Their faces would be illuminated by the stage lights reflecting off the white tulle of a ballet skirt. They would be smiling, that specific, soft, open-mouthed smile they saved exclusively for moments when my sister, Lila, was in motion. My phone buzzed against my thigh, hidden beneath the heavy synthetic fabric of my gown. It was time. The dean of the School of Engineering had just stepped up to the microphone. The static crackled. The first names were being called: Abbott, Adams, Agnew. I slid my phone out, shielding the screen from the glare. "Mom." I opened the message. "Sweetie, Lila's schedule got shifted last minute. She has a solo in the second act. We just couldn't miss it. You know how nervous she gets. Your ceremony will be fine, right? You are always fine." Attached was a photo. It was blurry, taken in the low light of the theater wings. Lila was there, dressed in a white tutu that looked like a cloud trapped around her waist. Her face painted with stage makeup, beaming at the camera. She looked beautiful. She looked cherished. "You are always fine." The words sat on the screen, sharp and heavy. They were not a compliment. They were a dismissal. They were the architectural blueprint of my entire life, the load-bearing wall that allowed my parents to pile all their emotional resources onto Lila while leaving me to hold up my own roof. Naomi Blake, Bachelor of Science, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The voice boomed over the loudspeakers, distorted slightly by the echo of the courtyard. It was my name. It was the sound I had worked 4 years for, surviving on caffeine and sheer spite, coding until my vision blurred. securing grants and teaching assistant positions so I would not have to ask Howard for rent money. I stood up. My legs felt mechanical, like prosthetics I was learning to use for the first time. I stepped into the aisle. Do not look. Do not look. I looked. It was a reflex, a biological imperative that 22 years of conditioning could not override. My eyes snapped to the section marked for the Blake family. There were 3 white chairs. They were empty. In a sea of packed bodies, shoulder-to-shoulder cheering sections, and waving signs. Those 3 chairs were a vacuum. They were louder than the applause. They were gaping wounds in the crowd. A woman sitting behind them had put her purse on one of the seats, using the vacancy of my family as a convenient shelf. I kept walking. I had practiced this smile in the bathroom mirror of my dorm room for 20 minutes this morning. It was a tight, polite expression that reached the corners of my mouth but stopped dead before it hit my eyes. I walked up the stairs. The dean was waiting. He was a tall man with a beard that looked like gray steel wool. He held out his hand. I took it. His grip was firm, professional. He handed me the diploma holder. It was empty. Of course, the real paper would be mailed later, but this was the symbol. He paused, just for a fraction of a second. His eyes flicked over my shoulder, scanning the crowd, looking for the pocket of noise that usually accompanied a student on stage. Usually. There was a scream, a whistle, a cowbell, something. For me, there was polite clapping from the general audience, the generic applause you give to a stranger. The dean looked back at me. His eyes softened. It was a look of pity. It was a microscopic flinch of understanding. He knew. In that split second, he saw the 3 empty chairs reflecting in my eyes. "Congratulations, Naomi," he whispered. It wasn't the boisterous congratulations he had given the guy before me. It was gentle. It was the tone you use at a funeral. "Thank you," I said. My voice was steady. It was terrifyingly steady. I walked across the rest of the stage. The cameras flashed, capturing the moment. I knew what the picture would look like. A girl in a gray gown, clutching a leather folder, walking against a background of blurred faces, none of whom knew her middle name. I descended the stairs on the other side. The ceremony continued. The conveyor belt of graduates kept moving. O'Connor, Patel, Peterson. I did not go back to my seat. I kept walking, past the rows of students, past the faculty, until I reached the edge of the courtyard. I slipped out of the cordon and found a spot on the stone steps of the main building, near the massive columns that made the entrance look like a Greek temple. I sat down on the cold granite. The stone bit into my legs through the gown. Around me, the chaos of the post-ceremony reunion was beginning. Families were finding their graduates. I watched a father wrap his son in a bear hug that looked like it might crack a rib, lifting him off the ground. The father was crying. "We are so proud of you," a mother shrieked nearby, adjusting her daughter's cap for a photo. "Look at you, my smart girl." The air was thick with pride. It was a tangible substance, sticky and sweet, and I was choking on it. My phone buzzed again. I looked down. Another text from Patricia. "The performance was amazing. She was born for the stage. The director said she has real potential for the city troupe." I stared at the screen. I waited. I watched the 3 dots of the typing indicator appear, and my heart gave a stupid, traitorous lurch. Maybe now they would say it. "How was it? Did you walk yet? We are thinking of you." The dots disappeared. Nothing else came. Born for the stage. That was it. That was the summary of the day. I put the phone down on the stone step next to me. The screen went black, reflecting the blue sky. This was not a sudden injury. It was not a knife in the back. It was just the final stitch in a quilt they had been sewing around me since I was old enough to read. It was the realization that the small ceremony they had skipped wasn't small to the world. It was only small to them. Because I was small to them. My achievements were quiet, digital, invisible things happening inside metal boxes. Lila's achievements were loud, visual, performative. I sat there while the sun moved across the sky, changing the shadows of the columns. I watched a grandmother hand a bouquet of roses to a boy who looked embarrassed but happy. I watched a younger brother punch a graduate on the arm, laughing. I was not crying. That was the strange part. I checked in with myself, running a diagnostic on my emotional state. Heart rate, elevated. Temperature, normal. Tears, 0. Instead of sadness, I felt something else. I felt a cold, hard clarity settling in my chest, like liquid nitrogen being poured over a circuit board. For 22 years, I had been auditing a course titled How to Win Your Parents' Love. I had studied hard. I had gotten straight A's. I had won the science fair. I had cooked dinner when Mom was tired. I had driven Lila to practice when Dad was working late. I had gotten into the best engineering school in the world. I had just failed the final exam, or rather, I realized the exam had never existed. The curve was rigged. I picked up my phone again. The metal casing was hot from the sun. I unlocked it. I opened my contacts list. My finger hovered over the first entry. Dad. Howard, the man who taught me how to ride a bike but forgot to come to my high school valedictorian speech because Lila had a twisted ankle. I tapped the screen. Edit, delete contact. The name vanished. I scrolled down. Mom. Patricia, the woman who told me I was the strong one so often that she forgot strong things can break if you put enough pressure on them. Block caller, delete contact. Gone. I found the group chat labeled Blake Family. It was mostly photos of Lila, Lila's costumes, Lila's trophies, Lila's new shoes. Leave conversation, delete. I did not do this with anger. I did not throw the phone. I did not scream. My movements were precise, efficient, like I was debugging a line of code that was causing the whole system to crash. I deleted the landline number of our house in Ohio. I deleted my aunt's number, the one who always told me to be more understanding of my mother's stress. When I was finished, my contact list was short. It contained a few friends from the lab, my academic advisor, and the number for the pizza place down the street. I took a deep breath. The air tasted like car exhaust and summer flowers. The line was drawn. It was a silent, invisible border, but it was as real as the stone steps beneath me. They had chosen their seats in that dark theater. Now, they would have to stay in them. I stood up, brushed the dust off my gown, and turned my back on the empty chairs for the last time. If you walked down the hallway of my childhood home in Ohio, you would learn exactly who mattered before you even reached the kitchen. It was a modest single-story house with a wooden porch that groaned under the weight of winter snow, but inside, the walls were a gallery. My mother, Patricia, had arranged the family photographs with the precision of a museum curator. There were dozens of frames, a chronological timeline of growth and achievement. 80% of those frames featured Lila. There was Lila in her first tutu, a puff of pink tulle around a diaper. Lila at 5, holding a plastic wand. Lila at 8, her face painted like a cat for a recital. Lila at 12, holding a silver trophy that was nearly as big as her torso. If you looked closely, really closely, you might find me. I was the blurry figure in the background of a chaotic Christmas morning shot, or the shoulder visible at the edge of the frame where Lila was blowing out candles. I was the negative space in the composition of our family history. The logic behind this curatorial choice was always the same. It was a mantra that Patricia repeated so often it felt less like an explanation and more like a law of physics. Lila is sensitive, she would say, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as she packed Lila's dance bag while I made my own lunch. You are stronger. Naomi, you can handle things. Lila needs us to hold her up. Strength, in the Blake household, was not a compliment. It was a consolation prize. It was the reason why. When I asked if they could come to my debate team finals, Patricia sighed and pointed to the calendar on the fridge. The calendar was a chaotic mosaic of highlighter ink, marking rehearsals, fittings, and masterclasses. My events were not even penciled in. I was the cactus that could survive a drought. Lila was the orchid that would wither if the temperature dropped by 2 degrees. I remember my 10th birthday with a clarity that still stings like rubbing alcohol on a paper cut. It fell on a Tuesday, which happened to be the same night as a dress rehearsal for the Nutcracker. Lila was playing a snowflake, one of 12. But to hear my parents talk, you would think she had been cast as the Sugar Plum Fairy at the Bolshoi. We were in the minivan, speeding down the interstate. The air conditioner was blasting because Lila did not want to sweat off her stage makeup. I was sitting in the back, squeezed next to a stack of costume bags that smelled of hairspray and old sweat. Patricia turned around from the passenger seat, her eyes wide with a sudden, frantic realization. "Oh God," she said. "Today is the 14th. It is Naomi's birthday." Howard kept his eyes on the road. "We can't stop. Patty, call time is in 20 minutes. "We have to get gas anyway," Patricia said. They pulled into a gas station a mile from the theater. Howard pumped the gas while Patricia ran inside. She came back 2 minutes later holding a plastic container. Inside was a single vanilla cupcake, the kind that sits under a heat lamp next to the hot dogs. The frosting slightly melted and sliding off the side. She unwrapped it and stuck a single blue candle into the center. She did not light it because open flames were dangerous in a moving vehicle. She just held it out to me over the center console as we merged back onto the highway. "Happy birthday, sweetie," she said, breathless and already checking her watch. "Make a wish. Hurry." I looked at the unlit candle. I looked at the cupcake, which had a thumbprint in the icing. Then I looked at the back of Lila's head. She was humming Tchaikovsky, completely oblivious, practicing her arm movements in the air. I made a wish. I wished that just once I could be fragile enough to matter. I ate the cupcake in 3 bites. It tasted like chemicals and sugar. By the time I swallowed the last crumb, we were at the theater, and the focus had shifted entirely back to the crisis of Lila's lost bobby pins. The contrast was brutal. Lila's birthdays were productions. There were always balloons tied to the mailbox. There were video montages Howard edited together. There were parties where aunts and uncles crowded into our living room, piling gifts wrapped in silver paper onto the coffee table. I would carry trays of ice and soda, weaving through the legs of adults who were busy cooing over the birthday girl. "Look at her posture," an aunt would say, sipping wine. "She is a born dancer, a little angel." I would retreat to the kitchen, washing the cake plates, listening to the laughter erupt from the other room. I was not angry at Lila. That was the complexity of it. Lila was sweet. She was genuinely soft. She would run into the kitchen later, flushed and happy, and hug me. "Thank you for helping, Naomi," she would say, and I would hug her back, because I loved her, and because hating her would have made me the villain in a story where I was already barely a character. By the time I reached high school, I had learned to weaponize my own invisibility. I stopped asking. I started winning. I won the state science fair in my junior year. My project was a complex analysis of data encryption patterns, something I had worked on for 6 months in the silence of the school library. I had to give a speech at the awards ceremony in the Capitol. It was a prestigious event. The governor was there. I stood at the podium, the microphone cold against my chin. The lights were blinding, but I could see the first few rows. There was a row of chairs marked with white paper signs that read, "Reserved for finalists' families." To my left, the parents of the second-place winner were holding hands, leaning forward, their faces distinct with anticipation. To my right, a grandmother was adjusting her glasses to get a better look. Directly in front of me, there were 2 empty chairs. The paper sign reserved. Blake family sat on the seat cushion, crisp and undisturbed. Patricia was not there. Howard was not there. A prestigious ballet company from Chicago was holding auditions in a city 3 hours away, and they had taken Lila. They had told me the night before, standing in the kitchen while I ironed my own shirt for the ceremony. Howard had put a hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, reassuring, and utterly dismissive. "You know how it is, Naomi," he had said. "Your academics are a sure thing. You are going to win anyway. You don't need us there to hold your hand. Lila is different. She is fragile. If she doesn't get this part, she is going to fall apart. She needs the support. You are a rock." A rock, an inanimate object, something that does not bleed when you kick it. I gave my speech to a room full of strangers. I accepted the heavy glass plaque. I shook the governor's hand. When I got home that night, the house was dark. They were not back yet. I placed the award on the kitchen counter, next to the toaster. The next morning, it had been moved to the top of the fridge to make room for the breakfast cereal. Patricia said, "Good job, honey," without looking up from the coffee maker, and then immediately launched into a story about how the casting director had looked at Lila's arch. I learned to shrink. I learned that if I wanted to be part of the family, I had to be a supporting character in the Lila show. I helped her with her algebra homework because her brain did not work that way. I stayed up until 2 a.m. helping her glue rhinestones onto a costume because her hands were shaking from nerves. I made posters for her recitals using the graphic design skills I had taught myself. I did these things because I wanted to be good. I wanted to prove that I was not jealous. Jealousy was ugly. Jealousy was for weak people, and I was the strong one. I was the sure thing. But the moment that severed something vital inside me happened when Lila turned 16. We were all in the living room. It was a Saturday morning. Howard told us to come outside. Parked in the driveway was a used Honda Civic. It was not a new car, but it was polished to a shine, and there was a giant red bow tied to the roof. "Happy birthday, baby," Howard shouted, throwing his arms wide. Lila shrieked. It was a high, piercing sound of pure delight. She ran out into the snow in her socks, jumping up and down. Neighbors came out onto their porches to watch. Patricia was filming on her camcorder, narrating the scene with a choked-up voice. "Look at her face," Howard beamed. "She needs it for rehearsals. The studio is so far away now." I stood on the porch, leaning against the railing. I was 18 years old. I was taking advanced calculus and physics classes at the community college 10 miles away because the high school curriculum had run out of math for me. I did not have a car. The next morning, the day after the red bow and the shrieking joy, a blizzard hit Ohio. 6 inches of snow fell overnight. The plows had not come through our neighborhood yet. I woke up at 5 a.m. I put on 2 pairs of socks, my heavy boots, and my coat. I wrapped a scarf around my face. I walked out the front door, past the Honda Civic with the snow piling up on its red bow. I walked 2 miles to the bus stop. The wind was cutting through my jeans, freezing the skin on my thighs. I trudged through gray slush, my breath coming in white clouds. I waited for 40 minutes for a bus that smelled like wet wool and diesel fuel. When I sat down on the hard plastic seat of the bus, shivering so hard my teeth clicked together, I imagined my parents sleeping in their warm bed. I imagined Lila sleeping, dreaming of pirouettes, her car keys on the nightstand. They knew I walked. They knew the bus schedule. They knew it was snowing. They just assumed I could handle it. That was the moment I realized I did not hate them. Hate is a hot, active emotion. It implies passion. What I felt was a hollow, aching exhaustion. What hurt was not that they didn't love me. I knew, in their own limited, damaged way, they did. What hurt was that they truly believed this was fair. They believed that neglecting me was a form of complimenting my resilience. They had categorized their children into the one who needs us and the one who serves us, and they slept soundly at night believing that this distribution of labor was an act of parenting. I watched the gray Ohio landscape roll past the bus window. The telephone poles ticking by like seconds on a clock I was desperate to smash. They thought I was a rock. They forgot that rocks are not born. They are formed by pressure, by crushing weight, over a very long time. And sometimes, if you strike a rock at the right angle, it doesn't just crack, it sparks. Code became my sanctuary, not because it was exciting, but because it was fair. In the high school library, tucked away in the back corner behind the reference section where the dust motes danced in the silence, I discovered that computers did not care if you were the favorite child. If you wrote the syntax correctly, the program ran. If you made a mistake, it failed. It did not matter if you were pretty or sensitive, or if you had a solo in the second act. The machine was a meritocracy of one, and for the first time in my life, I felt the relief of a system that made sense. I taught myself Python and Java while my parents were driving Lila to rehearsals. I applied for scholarships late at night, typing essays on the kitchen table after everyone else had gone to bed. The blue light of the laptop screen the only thing illuminating the room. I asked my physics teacher for a letter of recommendation because I knew better than to ask Patricia to proofread my personal statement. She would have asked why I wasn't writing about how dance inspired me. When the large envelope from MIT arrived, I was the only one home. I held the thick packet in my hands, feeling the weight of the paper. It felt like a ticket out. It felt like oxygen. When Patricia came home, carrying a bag of point shoes that cost $120 a pair, I placed the letter on the counter. "I got in," I said. "I got into MIT." Patricia stopped. She looked at the letter, then at me. There was no squeal of excitement. There was no hug. Her brow furrowed, a crease appearing between her eyes as she performed a mental calculation that had nothing to do with my intelligence and everything to do with logistics. "Massachusetts?" she asked. "That is in Boston, right? That is almost a day of driving. How are we supposed to get Lila to her intensive if we have to fly back and forth for parents' weekends or graduation?" "That is very inconvenient. Naomi." I folded the letter. I slid it back into the envelope. The bubble of pride in my chest didn't pop. It just slowly deflated, letting out a long, quiet hiss. "Don't worry," I told her, my voice flat. "I won't ask you to visit often." "Well, that is good," she said, turning back to the shoes, "because this season is going to be brutal for the schedule." I went to Cambridge with a suitcase I packed myself and a heart that had calcified a little more around the edges. But the real blow came 3 weeks into my first semester. I went to the bursar's office to check on my tuition payments. I knew there was a college fund. My grandfather had set it up years ago, and I had seen the statements when I was younger. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to cover the gaps that financial aid didn't catch. The woman behind the glass partition typed my name into her computer. She frowned. "Miss Blake, we show a partial payment, but there is still a significant balance. The account linked to the family trust was declined for insufficient funds." I called home. Patricia answered on the third ring. "Oh, that?" she said, sounding distracted. I could hear the blinker of the car clicking in the background. "We had to borrow a little from that account. Sweetie, just a temporary thing. Lila got into that Royal Academy summer program in London. You know how prestigious that is. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We figured you would get scholarships anyway. You are so smart. You always find a way." I sat on the floor of my dorm room, staring at a textbook I couldn't afford to keep if I didn't pay the bill. They had sent my sister to Europe with my tuition money. They hadn't borrowed it. You don't borrow from a child without asking. You steal. So, I worked. I didn't have the typical college experience of parties and road trips. I worked the early shift at the library, shelving books at 5 in the morning. I worked as a teaching assistant for the introductory computer science class, grading terrible code until my eyes burned. I picked up freelance coding gigs on Reddit, fixing broken websites for $50 an hour. I paid for my own education. I bought my own freedom, dollar by dollar, hour by hour. In my junior year, I landed a position as a research assistant for Professor Yip, a man who was a legend in the field of artificial intelligence. It was a position usually reserved for doctoral candidates. It was huge. I called home to tell them. I needed to tell someone, and the old instinct, the desperate, childish hope that maybe this time it would be big enough to matter, kicked in. "Mom, I got the position," I said, pacing the narrow hallway of my apartment. "I'm going to be working on the neural network project. Professor Yip picked me personally." "That sounds complicated, honey," Patricia said. Her voice was echoey. "Hold on, Lila. Turn around. Let me fix this strap. It is digging into your shoulder." "Mom, did you hear me? It comes with a stipend. I can finally pay off the credit card." "That is great. Naomi, really great. Look, we are in the dressing room. The show starts in 20 minutes and Lila has lost her left slipper. It is a madhouse here. Can I call you back?" "Hi, Naomi." Lila's voice drifted in, sweet and breathless. Sorry, I love you, gotta go. The line went dead. I stood there, listening to the silence, realizing that I could have told them I had discovered a cure for a plague or been elected president of the moon, and it would still be less important than a missing ballet slipper. I stopped calling as much after that. I tried digital updates instead. I sent links to the live streams of my project presentations. I sent PDFs of the papers I had co-authored. I sent screenshots of my 4.0 GPA. The responses were always the same variations of disinterest. Driving. We'll look later. At rehearsal? Good job. Dad is parking the car. Talk soon. They never looked later. The view counts on the videos I sent remained at 0. By the time the spring of my senior year arrived, the separation felt physical. My friends were creating group chats named Graduation Squad and Parents' Dinner. They were making reservations at the nice steakhouses in Back Bay. They were complaining about their mothers buying embarrassing outfits. I sent an email to Patricia and Howard in February. Graduation is June 3rd. The ceremony starts at 10 in the morning. I need to know if you are coming so I can reserve the tickets. There is a limit of 4 per student. The reply came 3 days later. We have to check the schedule. The spring recital dates haven't been finalized yet. You know how it is. Put us down as a maybe. A maybe. For my college graduation. I waited. March passed. April passed. I stopped asking my friends what their families were doing because I didn't want to explain why mine was a maybe. 1 week before the ceremony, I called them. I needed an answer. The tickets were due to be released, and I had to submit the names. Howard answered. He sounded cheerful, which immediately made my stomach tighten. Hey, kiddo, how is the weather up there? It's fine, Dad, I said. I need to know about Friday. Are you coming? There was a pause, a long, heavy pause that stretched across the phone line, filling the space between us with everything he wasn't saying. Listen, Naomi, Howard started, his voice shifting into that reasonable, logical tone he used when he was explaining why I couldn't have something I wanted. We looked at everything. The thing is, Lila's solo got moved. It is the same day, and it's not just any solo. It's the lead in the second act. The director is bringing in scouts. I see, I said. I was gripping the phone so hard my knuckles were white. But this is my graduation, Dad, from MIT. We know, Howard said soothingly, and we are so proud. But here is the thing. We looked it up online. MIT live streams the whole ceremony, high definition. We can watch you walk across the stage on the iPad right here. We won't miss a thing. But Lila, her performance isn't recorded. It is a live theater moment. It happens once. If we miss it forever. So you are going to watch me on an iPad? I asked. My voice sounded very small, like a child's. It is just the modern way. Naomi, you are a tech whiz. You understand efficiency. We can be there for both of you this way, physically with her, digitally with you. It is the best solution. He called it a solution, as if my life was an equation he had balanced by removing me from the variable list. Okay, I said. Okay, Dad. You are okay with it, right? You were always the independent one. We knew you would understand. I understand, I said, and I did. I understood perfectly. I hung up the phone. I didn't throw it. I didn't scream. I stood in the middle of my room, surrounded by boxes. I spent the rest of the night packing. I folded my graduation gown, which I had picked up earlier that day. I packed my books. I took down the few photos I had on the wall. As I taped up a box marked freshman year, I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I saw a girl who had spent 22 years begging for a seat at her own family's table. I saw a girl who had thought that if she just achieved enough, earned enough, became enough, they would finally look at her and see something other than Lila's shadow. I was done begging. Lila is fragile, they always said. Naomi is strong. They were right. I was strong. Strong enough to stop waiting for people who were never coming. I touched the screen of my phone, looking at the contact names one last time before the day of the ceremony. We knew you would understand. I do, I whispered to the empty room. I understand that I am alone. And that was the moment, standing among the cardboard boxes of my life, that the decision was made. I wouldn't fight them. I wouldn't argue. I would just let the bridge burn, and I would warm my hands over the fire. 5 years later, they would tell people they had no idea why I left, but they knew. They just didn't think I would ever actually do it. They bet on my need for their approval being stronger than my self-respect. They bet wrong. The silence that followed my graduation was not empty. It was heavy. Like a physical weight I had been carrying in a backpack for 2 decades and had finally decided to drop. Back in my rental room, with the scent of cheap champagne from a generic reception still clinging to my hair, I sat on the edge of the mattress. The screen of my phone was the only light in the room. I did not send a final angry manifesto. I did not type out a long paragraph detailing every missed birthday, every forgotten ceremony, or the exact dollar amount of the tuition money they had siphoned away for Lila's ballet career. That would have been an invitation for a response, and I was done negotiating. I opened the contact card for Patricia. My thumb hovered over the red text at the bottom. Block this caller. I tapped it. The phone asked for confirmation. I gave it. I did the same for Howard. I did the same for the group chat titled Blake Family Updates, which was currently filled with 3 videos of Lila's curtain call from that afternoon. It was surgical. It was clinical. It felt like cauterizing a wound. There was no pain in the immediate moment, just the smell of burning bridges and the sudden, shocking realization that the bleeding had stopped. 2 weeks later, I packed everything I owned into the back of a rental sedan and drove west. I had accepted a job offer from a company in Denver called Helix Frontier Labs. It was not a household name. It did not have a sprawling campus with free gourmet cafeterias or nap pods. It was a research facility housed in a repurposed industrial warehouse, filled with engineers who cared more about code efficiency than stock options. I chose it because they had not asked me about my hobbies during the interview. They had handed me a tablet with a broken piece of code and asked me to fix it. When I did, in 10 minutes, the hiring manager just nodded and said, "Can you start on the 1st of July?" That was the kind of language I understood. My new apartment was a studio in a converted brick building near the train tracks. The walls were exposed brick that shed red dust if you brushed against them too hard. The kitchen was a single strip of counter space and a stove that looked like it had survived the Cold War. I furnished it with a sofa I bought for $40 at a garage sale and a bookshelf. I assembled myself using a screwdriver and a lot of swearing. On the wall above the sofa, I hung exactly one picture. It was the photo the professional photographer had taken of me on the stage at MIT, in the frame. I was shaking the dean's hand. The background was blurred. You could not see the empty seats. You could not see the missing parents. There was just me, Naomi Blake, looking straight ahead, holding the proof of my own survival. The first few months were not the montage of freedom I had expected. They were terrifying. I had nightmares. In them, I was back in the auditorium, but the stage was made of ice, and every time I took a step toward the podium, I slipped. I would look to the left, and the chairs wouldn't just be empty, they would be giant, towering things, looming over me like judges. I would wake up sweating, reaching for a phone that would never ring with a call from my mother. The silence I had chosen was vast, and sometimes, in the middle of the night, it felt less like peace and more like drowning. I felt like I had jumped off a sinking ship into the open ocean. Yes, I was no longer going down with the wreckage, but I was also treading water in the dark with no land in sight. Work became my anchor. Helix Frontier Labs was a chaotic, high-energy environment where results were the only currency. My manager was a man named Rowan, a guy in his 40s who wore flannel shirts and drank coffee out of a beaker. One Tuesday, late in October, I was still at my desk at 10 at night. The rest of the team had gone home. I was wrestling with a data set that refused to align. Rowan walked by. He stopped, looked at my screen, and then looked at the empty office. He walked to the break room and came back with 2 mugs. He set one down next to my keyboard. It was black coffee, hot and bitter. "You fixed the compression algorithm," he said. It wasn't a question. I think so, I said, rubbing my eyes, but the latency is still too high. Rowan sat on the edge of my desk. The client didn't even know the compression was the problem. You found it, and you fixed it. That saved us 3 weeks of dev time. I shrugged, a reflex I had learned from years of having my achievements minimized. It is just my job, Rowan. It is not a big deal. Rowan looked at me. He had sharp eyes that didn't miss much. Naomi, listen to me. In this building, we deal in data. The data says you did an exceptional job. Stop trying to round down your own value. He took a sip of his coffee. Here is how it works at Helix. If you do good work, people will say you did good work. There is no hidden fee. There is no other shoe waiting to drop. You just take the win. I stared at him. I waited for the but. I waited for him to say, but Lila had a harder day. Or but you should have done it faster. It never came. Thanks, Rowan, I whispered. Go home, he said, standing up. The code will still be here in the morning. That was the beginning of the thaw. Slowly, painfully, I began to learn a new language of interaction. When my team solved a complex routing problem, my colleagues invited me out for drinks. We sat in a noisy bar, and they toasted to me. They clinked their glasses against mine and said, "Good catch on that syntax, Naomi." I didn't have to shrink. I didn't have to apologize for being right. At the end of my first year, the CEO, a woman barely 30 years old, held an all-hands meeting. She was going over the quarterly successes. I want to highlight the work on the diagnostic interface, she said, projecting a slide onto the wall. Specifically, the optimization protocol written by Naomi Blake. It is elegant, it is fast, and it is the reason we secured the contract with the hospital network. She pointed at me. 50 heads turned to look. My heart hammered against my ribs, panic rising in my throat. I expected them to look away, bored. I expected someone to stand up and say it wasn't enough. Instead, they clapped. It was loud, genuine applause. I sat there, gripping the arms of my chair, and I let myself feel it. It was a warm, strange sensation, like sunlight hitting a part of my skin that had never seen the day. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Evans. She was a woman with a soft voice and a spine of steel. Our sessions were difficult. They were like dissecting a cadaver. We had to cut through layers of dead tissue to find the cause of death. I feel guilty, I told her one afternoon, staring at the abstract painting on her wall. I feel like I abandoned them. They are my parents. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I should have just ignored the graduation thing. Naomi, Dr. Evans said, leaning forward. Imagine you have a roommate who keeps stealing your blood every day. They take a pint of blood while you sleep. You wake up exhausted, dizzy, dying. Finally, you move out and lock the door. Did you attack them? Did you hurt them? No, I said. You just stopped letting them bleed you dry, she said. That is what you did. You didn't punish them. You saved yourself. The guilt you feel? That is just the phantom pain of the limb you had to cut off to survive. We worked on vocabulary. I learned to say neglect instead of busy. I learned to say emotional abuse instead of misunderstanding. I learned that anger was not a defect in my operating system. It was a security feature alerting me to a breach. By my second year at Helix, I was promoted to team lead. I had 3 junior engineers reporting to me. I found myself checking on them, making sure they weren't burning out, praising them when they succeeded. I was terrified of becoming Patricia, so I became the anti-Patricia. I became the person who noticed everything. In my 3rd year, my name appeared on a patent application for a machine learning model that could predict patient deterioration hours before it happened. When the lawyers sent over the paperwork for me to sign, I traced the letters of my name, Naomi Blake. It stood alone on the line. It looked strong. By the 4th year, I was the technical backbone of the company's most ambitious project yet, a fully integrated AI for rural healthcare systems. The company was betting its future on it, and the CEO told the board of directors, "As long as Blake is running the architecture, I am not worried." I had built a life. It was a life made of code and brick walls, and mountains on the horizon. I had friends who knew my coffee order but didn't know my mother's name. I had a bank account that I controlled, a schedule that belonged to me, and a reputation that was built on what I delivered, not who I was related to. One evening, 4 years after leaving Cambridge, I stood on the balcony of my apartment. I had moved to a nicer place now, a loft with a view of the Denver skyline. The city was a grid of lights below me, amber and white, breathing in the cold mountain air. I held a glass of wine in my hand. My phone was on the table inside. It was quiet. I thought about the 3 empty chairs. The image still came to me sometimes, but it no longer made me wake up sweating. Now, it just looked like a fact, a sad, pathetic fact about 3 people who had chosen a performance over a person. I took a sip of wine. I felt the cold wind on my face. I was 26 years old. I was a lead engineer. I was a patent holder. I was a woman who paid her own rent and bought her own plane tickets. I realized, with a sudden, profound simplicity, that I did not wonder what would have happened if they had come to MIT. It didn't matter. If they had come, they would have complained about the heat. They would have checked their watches. They would have tainted the one thing that was purely mine. The emptiness they left had been painful. Yes, but in that space, I had built a cathedral. I looked out at the mountains, invisible in the dark but massive and present. "I am enough," I said out loud. The wind took the words away, but I heard them, and for the first time in my life, I believed them. I wasn't perfect. I still had scars that ached when the weather changed, but I was standing on my own 2 feet, and I was enough. Success looks different when you hold it in your hands than it does when you dream about it. When I was 20, success looked like an award ceremony with my parents cheering in the front row. Now, at 27, success looked like a glossy magazine sitting on my desk at Helix Frontier Labs. The publication was Wired, or something adjacent to it, the kind of magazine that sat on coffee tables in Silicon Valley lobbies. The headline was not flashy. It was typed in a clean, sans serif font. The architect of invisible care. The MIT graduate who quietly reshaped diagnostic AI. There was a photo of me. I was standing in the server room, arms crossed, wearing a navy blazer. I looked serious. I looked competent. I looked like a stranger to the girl who used to hide in the back of the library. My phone pinged with a notification. It was an email. The sender was Professor Yip, the man whose research assistantship had been my lifeline during my junior year. "Dear Naomi," I read the article. "Extraordinary work. The department is hosting a symposium for the graduating seniors next month. We would be honored if you would return to campus as our keynote speaker. They need to hear from someone who built the path while walking on it." I stared at the screen. I had not been back to Massachusetts in 5 years. I had not crossed the Charles River since the day I walked away from 3 empty chairs and a silent phone. I replied 10 minutes later, "I will be there." Returning to Cambridge felt like walking into a memory that had been frozen in liquid nitrogen. The air smelled exactly the same. River water, old books, and exhaust. But the campus had shrunk. The buildings that used to loom over me like giants now just looked like buildings. I walked from the parking lot to the lecture hall. My heels clicked on the pavement. A sharp, authoritative sound. I stopped when I reached the main quad. To my right were the stone steps. I stood there for a moment, letting the crowd of students flow around me like water around a rock. I remembered sitting right there, in that exact spot, feeling the cold granite bite into my legs through my graduation gown. I remembered the sensation of being hollowed out, the absolute certainty that I was invisible. I looked at the spot where I had sat. It was empty. The ghost of the girl I used to be was gone. "Miss Blake?" I turned. A young woman with a lanyard around her neck was smiling at me. She was holding a clipboard. "I am the student coordinator," she said, her eyes wide. "We are so excited you are here. Professor Yip calls you the pride of the department." The pride of the department. The words settled strangely in my ears. I smiled, a professional expression I had perfected in boardrooms. "It is good to be back," I said. The lecture hall was packed, standing room only. I stood at the podium, adjusting the microphone, The lights were bright, blinding me to the back rows, which was a mercy. My speech was not about code. It was not about algorithms or neural networks. I talked about architecture, not of software, but of life. You will build systems. I told them, you will design logic flows. But the most important system you will ever architect is your own support network. We are taught that biology is the default setting for family. It is not. Biology is just hardware. Family is the software you choose to install. And sometimes, for the system to run, you have to uninstall the legacy programs that are crashing your drive. You have to set boundaries not as walls, but as firewalls. They don't just keep things out. They protect the integrity of what is inside. The room was silent. They were listening, not politely, but hungrily. When I opened the floor for questions, hands shot up. They asked about the industry, about being a woman in tech, about the ethical implications of AI. Then, a young man in the third row stood up. He looked nervous. He was twisting his hands together, a gesture that reminded me so much of myself at that age that my chest tightened. "You talk about choosing your own family," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "And you are so successful now, but does your family get it? Are they proud of you?" The room went quiet. It was the question that usually prompted a heartwarming anecdote. It was the moment for the speaker to say, "My parents are my biggest fans." I looked at the student. I did not look away. I did not flinch. "I learned something very important a few years ago," I said, my voice steady and amplified by the speakers. "I learned that not everyone who carries the name Blake understands the full value of the name Naomi, and that is also fine." There was a pause, a beat of silence where the words hung in the air, sharp and unretractable. Then someone in the back started clapping, then another. It wasn't the polite applause of my graduation, it was resonance. That evening, I checked social media. The quote had been tweeted by the Student Union account. It had been shared hundreds of times. Not everyone understands the value of your name. It was spreading. The algorithm, ironic as it was, did its job. As my name trended in these small, specific circles, it began to pop up on the feeds of people I had not spoken to in half a decade. The woodwork effect began. First, it was a LinkedIn request from a cousin I hadn't seen since I was 12. Then, a Facebook message from an aunt who used to criticize my hair. "Saw the article. So proud of our girl. We always knew you were special. Hope you are doing well. Superstar." I read them with the detachment of a scientist observing bacteria in a petri dish. There was no anger. There was no joy. There was just a flat, gray observation of human nature. They were not reacting to me. They were reacting to the shine. They were moths attracted to a new light bulb. I didn't reply. I didn't delete them, either. I just let them sit there in the unread folder, a digital graveyard of sudden interest. But then, an email arrived that was different. The subject line was simply, "Wedding." The sender was Marcus Hale. I paused. Marcus, my cousin on my father's side. He was 3 years older than me. I had a sudden, vivid memory of a family barbecue when I was 9. I had been sitting alone at the picnic table because Patricia had forgotten to pack me a lunch in the rush to get Lila's costume to the dry cleaner. Marcus had walked over, sat down without a word, and slid his basket of curly fries to the center of the table. He didn't make a big deal of it. He just shared his fries. I opened the email. It was a digital invitation to a wedding in Napa Valley, California. The design was elegant, tasteful, but it was the text in the body of the email that made me stop. "Hey, Naomi. I know you are ghosting the family. I get it. Honestly, I do. I have seen the article. I showed it to my fiancé, and I bragged that I used to sneak you fries when nobody was looking. I am getting married in October. I want you to be there, and I know they will be there too. Uncle Howard and Aunt Patricia are on the guest list. I can't not invite them. My mom would kill me. But here's the thing. I don't want you to come to make peace. I don't want you to come to cause a scene. I want you to walk into that room with the status of the person you have become. I want you to occupy the space you deserve. You are not the kid in the background anymore. Come show them what they missed." Best, Marcus. I sat back in my chair. The office was quiet. The cleaning crew was vacuuming the hallway outside. Come show them what they missed. For 5 years, I had protected myself by hiding. I had built a fortress of silence. I had assumed that the only way to be safe was to be absent. But Marcus was offering a different hypothesis. He was suggesting that I didn't need to hide anymore. He was suggesting that the power dynamic had shifted, and I was the only one who hadn't fully realized it yet. I looked at the date. October. The vineyards would be turning gold. The air would be crisp. I imagined walking into that wedding. I imagined seeing Patricia. I imagined seeing Howard. 5 years ago, the thought would have paralyzed me. I would have felt like the little girl begging for a cupcake. But I wasn't that girl. I was the architect of invisible care. I was the woman who had stared down a room full of MIT students and told them that biology was just hardware. I opened a new tab on my browser. I went to the airline website. I typed in Denver to San Francisco. I selected first class. I didn't choose the upgrade because I was arrogant. I chose it because for my entire life, I had been told to sit in the back, to take the smallest piece, to be grateful for the leftovers. I hovered the mouse over the purchase button. This was not a reconciliation tour. I wasn't going there to hug them and cry and ask why they didn't love me enough. I wasn't going there to demand an apology they were incapable of giving. I was going there to exist. I was going there to stand in the same room as the people who had erased me and force them to look at the ink that refused to fade. I clicked purchase. The confirmation appeared on the screen. Your trip to Napa Valley is booked. I leaned back, a small cold smile touching my lips. Okay, Marcus, I whispered. I will come. I picked up my phone. I didn't unlock it. I just held it, feeling the weight of it, the weight of the silence I was about to break, not with a shout, but with an arrival. I was going to the wedding, and I wasn't bringing a gift. I was bringing the truth. The week before I was scheduled to fly to California, the past arrived in my mailbox not as a ghost, but as paperwork. It was a Tuesday. The Denver air was already carrying the bite of early autumn. I unlocked my small metal mailbox in the lobby of my building and pulled out 2 envelopes. One was thick and cream-colored, the cardstock heavy enough to use as a weapon. That was Marcus's wedding invitation, the formal physical copy confirming the digital one. The calligraphy was elegant, looping and golden. The second envelope was thin, white, and unassuming. The return address was stamped in black ink. Harrington and Associates, attorneys at law. The address was from my hometown in Ohio. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs to my loft, the envelopes pressed between my thumb and forefinger. My heart rate did not spike. My hands did not shake. I had trained myself out of those reactions. I simply felt a cold curiosity, the way a scientist looks at a petri dish that has suddenly changed color. I opened the legal letter first. It was brief, written in the dry, bloodless language of the law. It informed me that my grandfather, Arthur Blake, had passed away 3 months ago. I stopped reading. I lowered the paper. Grandpa Arthur was dead. I waited for the grief to hit, but it was blocked by a wall of confusion. No one had called me. No one had texted. My father, his own son, had not thought it necessary to inform me that the patriarch of our family was gone. I had been erased so completely from the family narrative that I did not even qualify for a funeral notification. I looked back at the letter. Mr. Blake left a substantial estate, including 100 acres of undeveloped land in the county and a diversified portfolio of stocks. According to the terms of the last will and testament, the distribution of these assets among the grandchildren is contingent upon a formal reading and a family consensus meeting. I frowned. Assets? Stocks? Growing up, the narrative in the Blake household had been one of noble, artistic poverty. Patricia and Howard always claimed we were scraping by. We have nothing. Naomi, they would say when I asked for a calculator for school or a new winter coat, we are sacrificing everything for the arts. I read the next paragraph. There are specific clauses in the will regarding the Trust for Educational Advancement established by Mr. Blake in the year 2005. Given the irregularities in the previous disbursements from this fund, your presence is mandatory to resolve the final allocation. We strongly advise you to attend to protect your existing legal interests. The signature at the bottom was Ms. Evelyn Harrington. I put the letter down on my kitchen island. The marble was cold under my palms. Irregularities. That was a polite word. It was a lawyer's word. It was the kind of word you used when you wanted to say theft without getting sued for libel. I went to my laptop. I didn't pour myself a drink. I didn't pace. I sat down and opened a browser window. I needed data. I logged into the alumni portal of MIT. It had been 5 years, but I remembered my student ID number as if it were my own birthday. I navigated to the financial archives. I requested a full download of my billing statements, tuition history, and the external funding logs from my freshman and sophomore years. While the files were downloading, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Facebook. I had not logged out of the app on my phone, though I rarely checked it. The message was from a woman named Beatrice, a second cousin I hadn't seen since I was 12. She was known in the family for 2 things: her excellent potato salad and her inability to keep a secret. "Hi, Naomi." The message read, "I heard you are coming to the wedding. That is brave of you. I just wanted to say, I hope you don't make a scene about the inheritance. I know you told your mom you didn't want Grandpa's money because it was too small for a big shot like you. But honestly, letting them use it for Lila's studio was the right thing to do. She is really struggling right now. Just let it go, okay?" I stared at the screen. The white light burned into my retinas. I read the sentence again. "I know you told your mom you didn't want Grandpa's money because it was too small for a big shot like you." The air in my loft seemed to vanish. This was not just about money. This was about the story. For years, I had assumed my parents were simply selfish. I thought they had prioritized Lila because they loved her more, because she was the shiny object that distracted them from their own mediocrity. I had accepted that. I had processed that in therapy. But this was different. This was calculation. They hadn't just taken the money from my college fund to pay for Lila's ballet trips. They had covered their tracks by inventing a Naomi who was arrogant, ungrateful, and wealthy enough to sneer at her grandfather's gift. They had turned me into the villain to justify their own embezzlement. I looked at the download bar on my laptop. Complete. I opened the first PDF. It was a transaction log from my freshman year. There it was, a deposit from the Arthur Blake Trust. $7,000. 2 days later, a withdrawal. The authorization signature was digital, but the name was clear: Patricia Blake, custodian. The memo line on the withdrawal did not say tuition. It did not say books. It said, "Transfer. Lila Blake Intensive. Paris." I opened the next file. Sophomore year. Another deposit from the trust. Another immediate withdrawal by Patricia. This time the memo was emergency family expense. I remembered that summer. That was the summer I stayed in the dorms because I couldn't afford a plane ticket home. That was the summer I ate peanut butter from the jar for dinner. That was the summer Patricia told me they couldn't help me with rent because money is so tight right now, honey. They had stolen from me. They had stolen money that was legally mine, left by my grandfather, and then they had lied to the entire family to make themselves look like victims of an ungrateful daughter. I felt a cold rage settle in my gut. It was heavy and solid, like a stone. This wasn't a family drama anymore. This was a crime scene. I stood up and walked to my bookshelf. I pulled down a sleek black leather portfolio. I usually used it for client presentations, for contracts worth 6 figures. I printed the bank statements. The sound of the printer rhythmically spitting out pages was the only sound in the apartment. Zip, zip, zip. I printed the email from the bursar's office from 5 years ago, the one stating my funds were insufficient. I printed the text messages I had saved, the ones where I asked for help and they said no. I printed the screenshot of Cousin Beatrice's message. I stacked them all in the portfolio. I organized them chronologically. I used sticky notes to flag the most damning dates. Then, I went to my closet. I pulled out my suitcase. I didn't pack the soft, comfortable clothes I wore to the lab. I packed my armor. I packed the tailored navy suit I wore to board meetings. I packed the silk blouse that made me look like I owned the building. I packed the heels that clicked sharply against the floor, announcing my arrival before I even entered a room. I was going to Napa Valley. I was going to watch Marcus get married. But the day after the wedding, I was going to walk into a room with Patricia and Howard. They were expecting the daughter who begged. They were expecting the girl who sat on the stone steps and cried silently. They were expecting the big shot who was too busy to care about a few $1,000s. They were not expecting a forensic audit. I looked at the legal letter one last time before slipping it into the front pocket of the portfolio. Your presence is mandatory. You have no idea, I whispered to the empty room. I zipped the suitcase shut. The sound was final, like a gavel hitting a block. I wasn't going home to make peace. I was going home to set the record straight, and I was bringing the receipts. I treated my childhood not as a memory, but as a corrupted data set that needed to be debugged line by line. Before I booked my flight to California, I spent 3 nights turning my living room into a command center. I wasn't looking for closure anymore. I was looking for a paper trail. I started with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I called the financial aid office, not as a confused student, but as an alumna who knew exactly which forms to reference. I requested the raw transaction logs from my freshman through senior years. I didn't want the summary. I wanted the granular data. I wanted the routing numbers, the timestamps, and the user access logs. When the secure file arrived in my inbox, I poured a glass of water and sat down to review it. It was a spreadsheet containing thousands of rows. I applied a filter for external deposits. There it was. In August of my freshman year, a deposit of $8,000 had hit my student account. The source was listed as the Arthur Blake Education Trust. I stared at the number, $8,000. That would have covered my meal plan and my books for the entire year. It would have meant I didn't have to work the 4 a.m. shift at the library. I moved my eyes to the next column. Less than 48 hours later, there was a withdrawal. The entire amount, minus a $20 processing fee, had been transferred out. I clicked on the transaction details. The authorization code was linked to a parental proxy account. Patricia Blake. And there, in the optional memo field which most people leave blank, my mother had typed a justification, perhaps thinking only the bank would ever see it. Reallocation. Lila Summer. Intensive Paris. I felt a physical chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It wasn't just that they took it, it was the speed. The money had barely touched my account before it was siphoned off to fund a European dance trip for a 16-year-old. I closed my eyes, and a memory surfaced. Sharp and sudden. I was 19, home for a rare weekend. The landline rang. It was Grandpa Arthur. I had picked it up in the kitchen. Naomi? His voice had been raspy, thin with age. How is school? Are you eating enough? I worry about you up there. Is the fund helping? I had opened my mouth to say, What fund, Grandpa? But Patricia had materialized out of nowhere. She had literally snatched the receiver from my hand, her nails digging into my skin. She is fine. Dad, she had chirped, her voice pitching up an octave into that fake, bright tone she used for audiences. She is doing great. We handled everything. She is so focused on her studies she barely looks at her bank account. Don't you worry about a thing. She had hung up and looked at me, her eyes hard. Don't bother your grandfather with money talk. Naomi, he is old. He gets confused. He hadn't been confused. He had been sending me lifelines, and my parents had been intercepting them to build a boat for Lila. I picked up my phone and dialed the number on the letterhead from the law firm. Ms. Harrington, I said when she answered. I have the records. Ms. Harrington was not a warm woman. She was efficient, sharp, and possessed a voice that sounded like crunching gravel. We spoke for an hour. I walked her through the transactions, the dates, the lack of consent. Here is the reality, Ms. Blake, she said. The trust was established with a fiduciary duty to both beneficiaries. If your mother, acting as custodian, used your portion for your sister without your explicit consent. That is not just bad parenting, that is misappropriation of funds. It is actionable. I don't need the money, I said automatically. It was a reflex. Stop, Harrington cut me off. This is not about your bank balance. This is about the fact that they used your name to authorize their lifestyle. They told a legal narrative that you were complicit in this. They signed your name to a story you didn't write. Are you okay with that? I looked at the spreadsheet again. Summer intensive. No, I said. I am not okay with that. Good, she said. Then bring everything to the meeting, because there is more. More? I did a background check on the family assets. As part of the estate probate, Harrington said. Your parents took out a second mortgage on their house 3 years ago, and a business loan. For what? For the Lila Blake School of Movement. I typed the name into my search bar. A website popped up. It was flashy, filled with auto-playing videos of Lila teaching toddlers how to plie. But when I dug deeper into the public business filings, the picture got darker. The studio had liens against it. There were 3 missed tax payments. The business was hemorrhaging money. Suddenly, the pieces clicked together. I had received a message earlier that day from an aunt I barely spoke to. It had seemed odd at the time. We are so glad you are coming to the reading. Naomi. She had written, It is time the family pulled together. Your mom is so stressed about the studio. We all know you will do the right thing. You are the successful one now. You can fix this. I read it again with my new context. They didn't want me to come home because they missed me. They didn't even want me to come home just to apologize. They wanted me to come home because they thought I was going to use my share of Grandpa's inheritance to bail out the failing dance studio. The narrative they were spinning to the extended family was that I was the prodigal daughter returning with a checkbook. They believed that because I was the responsible one, the strong one, I would naturally sacrifice my inheritance to save Lila's dream, just like I had sacrificed my birthdays, my graduations, and my childhood needs. They were walking into this meeting expecting a savior. They had no idea they were walking into an audit. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It was the calm of a structural engineer who has identified exactly where the bridge is broken and knows exactly how much dynamite it will take to bring it down safely. I spent the rest of the night printing. I printed the email from the bursar. I printed the transaction logs with the damning memos. I printed the public records of the liens on the dance studio. I printed the text messages where Patricia claimed they were too broke to help me with rent. I organized them into a leather binder. Tab A, Tab B, Tab C. It was a beautiful, terrible accumulation of evidence. 2 days later, I checked into a hotel in Napa Valley. The room was luxurious, overlooking a vineyard that was turning gold in the California sun. It was a world away from the dusty theater in Ohio, a world away from the cramped dorm room where I had eaten instant noodles while my tuition money paid for baguettes in Paris. I stood in front of the full-length mirror. I was wearing the navy suit I had packed. It was sharp, tailored, and expensive. I looked like a woman who ran companies. I looked like a woman who could not be interrupted. I picked up the leather binder. It was heavy in my hand. For 27 years, my parents had relied on my silence. They had relied on the fact that I would never make a scene, that I would always absorb the blow to keep the family steady. They counted on my passive strength. They had forgotten that strength. When compressed over time, becomes something else entirely. It becomes explosive. I looked at my reflection. You wanted me to be present, I whispered to the empty room. I am here. I placed the binder in my bag. This time, I said, my voice steady and cold, you won't just have to listen. You are going to have to sign. I walked out of the hotel room, the door clicking shut behind me with the finality of a vault locking. I was ready for the wedding, but more importantly, I was ready for the war that would come after the cake was cut. I approached the weekend not as a family reunion, but as a complex system deployment. In engineering, you do not launch a new protocol without testing the environment, anticipating the error codes, and building a failsafe. My parents relied on emotion, on the messy, chaotic improvisation of guilt and obligation. I was going to rely on architecture. I made one rule absolute. I would not ruin Marcus's wedding. He was the one person in that gene pool who had treated me with kindness, who had shared his curly fries when I was invisible. I would not pay him back by turning his reception into a brawl. Saturday was for Marcus. Sunday, the day of the legal meeting, was for the truth. But Saturday served a strategic purpose. It was the soft launch. It was the moment I would force Patricia and Howard to look at me, really look at me, before they had to sit across a negotiation table. I spent the morning in my hotel room constructing my defense. I wasn't practicing a speech. I was coding a firewall. I stood in front of the mirror, rehearsing the answers to the questions I knew were coming. "So, Naomi, we haven't seen you in forever. Where have you been?" I didn't practice the angry answer. I didn't practice screaming I've been healing from the trauma you inflicted. That would make me the unstable daughter. Instead, I practiced the neutral, impenetrable truth. I have been building my career in Denver. The work at Helix is demanding, but very rewarding. Why didn't you call? I needed to focus on my own foundations. It was a busy few years. Simple, unemotional, unassailable. If they wanted drama, they would have to generate it themselves, and I would not give them the fuel. I chose my outfit with the precision of a costume designer. I avoided the soft florals or pastels that were popular at weddings. I didn't want to look soft. I chose a jumpsuit in a deep, dark emerald silk. It was tailored, sharp, and modern. It didn't say, "I hope you like me." It said, "I run the meeting." Next, I executed the communication protocol. I called Ms. Harrington. "Send the email," I told her. "Are you sure?" she asked. "It is going to stir the pot before you even get into the room." "That is the point," I said. "I want the pot stirred. I want everyone to know exactly what is on the agenda for tomorrow. I don't want my parents pulling people into corners and whispering lies about how I am being difficult. I want the terms to be public." Ms. Harrington sent a formal notification to every beneficiary listed in the will. My parents, my aunts, my uncles, and even the adult cousins. The email was clear. It stated that the meeting would involve a full, transparent accounting of the Arthur Blake Education Trust, including a line-by-line review of all historical disbursements dating back to 2005. It was a warning shot. It told Patricia and Howard that there would be no kitchen table logic where they could guilt me into silence. This was happening on the record. Then, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my great-aunt June. She was 80 years old, sharp as a tack, and had never particularly liked Patricia. I knew she had been in the room when Grandpa signed the original trust documents. "Aunt June," I said, "I am coming to the meeting tomorrow. I have the records. Do you remember what Grandpa said when he set up the fund?" "I remember," June said, her voice crackling over the line. "He said it was for both of you, 50-50. He wanted you to have choices. Would you be willing to say that tomorrow, if they try to claim he changed his mind?" "Honey," she said, "I have been waiting 10 years to say a lot of things. I will be there." I made a similar call to my Uncle Ben. He was quieter, but he was a man of principle. He agreed to simply confirm the facts as he knew them. I didn't need an army. I just needed witnesses who wouldn't blink. Finally, I prepared the physical evidence. I had a slim leather folder. Inside, I arranged the documents not by type, but by narrative arc. Page 1, the acceptance letter from MIT. Page 2, the deposit of $8,000 from Grandpa's trust into my student account. Page 3, the withdrawal slip, dated 48 hours later, signed by Patricia. Page 4, the email I received from the bursar stating I was blocked from registering for classes due to unpaid fees. Page 5, a photograph of Lila in Paris that summer, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, wearing a brand new designer coat. Page 6, the text message from my mother saying, "We just don't have the money to help you right now, sweetie." And then, the centerpiece. I had printed 2 photos on high-quality glossy paper. The first was the one my friend had taken of the audience at my graduation. You could see the rows of families. You could see the cheering parents. And right in the center, you could see the 3 empty white chairs, a vacuum in the middle of the joy. Next to it, I placed the photo Patricia had sent me that exact same day, Lila on stage. The timestamp was visible in the metadata I had printed below it. It was a timeline of abandonment. It was irrefutable proof that their financial theft was just the logistical arm of their emotional neglect. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and looked at the folder. I closed my eyes and ran a simulation. Simulation A, the reconciliation. I walk into the meeting, I smile, I tell them I miss them. When the lawyer brings up the missing money, I wave my hand and say, "It is fine. We are family." I sign over my portion of the inheritance to save Lila's studio. Patricia cries and hugs me. Howard pats my back and says, "Good girl." The family cheers. I go back to Denver, lighter in the wallet, but heavy with the knowledge that I bought their love one more time. I spend the rest of my life wondering if they ever actually saw me, or if they just saw an ATM. I felt a wave of nausea roll through my stomach. It was a physical rejection of that future. Simulation B, the reckoning. I walk into the meeting. I place the folder on the table. I show them exactly what they did. I refuse to pay for a studio built on my stolen tuition. I claim what is mine, not because I need the money, but because Grandpa Arthur wanted me to have it. They scream, they cry, they call me cold, they call me ungrateful. Lila looks at me with betrayal. But I walk out. I walk out with my spine straight. I walk out knowing that I didn't agree to be a victim anymore. I lose them, yes, but I keep myself. I open my eyes. The nausea was gone. The choice wasn't even a choice. It was a necessity. I checked my watch. It was 4 in the afternoon. The wedding ceremony was starting in 30 minutes. I stood up. I smoothed the silk of my jumpsuit. I put on my heels. I applied a layer of lipstick that was the color of a dark red wine. I grabbed my clutch. I left the folder in the safe. I didn't need it for the wedding. Tonight, my presence was the evidence. I took the elevator down to the lobby and walked out into the California sunshine. The resort was beautiful. The air smelled of lavender and dry grass. The ceremony was being held on a lawn overlooking the valley. Rows of white chairs were set up, facing an altar made of driftwood and roses. Guests were already milling about. I saw faces I recognized. Cousins, neighbors from Ohio, people who existed in the blurry background of my childhood memories. I took a deep breath. I squared my shoulders. I began to walk across the lawn. The grass was soft, but my heels didn't sink. I walked with the stride of a woman who commands teams of engineers, who solves problems that involve millions of dollars and human lives. I saw heads turn. It started with a ripple. A cousin nudged an aunt. A friend whispered to a neighbor, "Is that her? Is that Naomi?" They were expecting the ghost. They were expecting the shadow who stood in the back of photos. Instead, they saw a woman who looked like she could buy the entire resort if she felt like it. I saw Marcus at the front, standing near the altar, adjusting his tie. He looked up. He saw me. A huge, genuine grin broke across his face. He gave me a subtle thumbs up. And then, I saw them. Patricia and Howard were standing near the second row. Patricia was wearing a pale blue dress that looked a little too fussy, a little too dated. Howard was in a suit that looked a size too large. Lila was next to them, looking lovely but anxious, twisting a ring on her finger. Patricia turned to see what everyone was looking at. Her eyes landed on me. I saw the recognition hit her face. It was followed immediately by shock, and then a flickering, uncertain fear. She took a half step back, her hand going to her throat. Howard turned, his mouth opening slightly. They looked at me, and for the first time in 27 years, they didn't look through me. They looked at me. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just held their gaze, calm and steady, as I walked past them to take my seat on the bride's side, placing myself firmly in the landscape of a family that had tried to erase me. I was here, and the silence I brought with me was louder than anything they could say. The cocktail hour was held on a terrace that hung over the vineyards like a shelf of polished stone. The sun was setting. turning the California hills into layers of gold and burnt orange. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that looked like pieces of art. It was a scene of perfect, curated happiness, the kind of setting where family secrets usually stayed buried under polite laughter and expensive wine. I stood near a pillar, holding a glass of sparkling water. I was observing the room, analyzing the social currents like a heat map. "Naomi." The voice was loud, warm, and unmistakably Marcus. He broke away from a group of his fiancée's relatives and made a beeline for me. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, his face flushed with the adrenaline of the day. He didn't shake my hand. He hugged me. It was a bear hug, tight and grounding, the kind that says, "I see you." "You came," he said, pulling back but keeping his hands on my shoulders. "I knew you would, but seeing you, wow, you look incredible, 'cause you look like you own the place." He turned to the group he had just left, his voice projecting clearly over the murmur of the crowd. "Everyone, this is my cousin Naomi Blake. She flew in from Denver. She is the lead engineer at Helix Frontier Labs. Basically, if artificial intelligence takes over the world next week, she is the one we have to be nice to." The group laughed, impressed. They looked at me with interest, extending hands, asking questions about my work. Marcus had done exactly what he promised. He had set the stage. He had framed me not as the estranged daughter, but as the distinguished guest. I saw the ripple effect immediately. Across the terrace, near the bar, Patricia and Howard were frozen. They were holding glasses of white wine, staring at the scene. They looked smaller than I remembered. Age had softened Howard's jawline, and Patricia's posture, usually rigid with dancer-like discipline, looked brittle. They were seeing something they didn't have a file for in their mental database. They remembered a girl in gray hoodies who hid in the library. They were looking at a woman in emerald silk who was holding court with the groom. Marcus squeezed my shoulder one last time and moved on to greet other guests. That was the signal. The buffer was gone. Patricia moved first. She navigated the crowd with a predator's focus, Howard trailing in her wake like a shadow. When she reached me, she stopped. Up close, I could see the lines around her eyes, the heavy makeup trying to conceal the stress of the failing studio. "Naomi," she breathed. She reached out as if to touch my arm, but I shifted my weight slightly, not stepping back, just making myself inaccessible. Her hand dropped. "Hello, Patricia." "Hello, Howard," I said. My voice was calm, pitched low enough that only we could hear. "That is it?" Patricia's voice trembled. It was a performance I recognized. It was The Aggrieved Mother. Act 1. 5 years, Naomi. 5 years without a phone call. We didn't know if you were dead or alive. Do you have any idea how much I have suffered? How could you do this to us?" She was trying to seize the narrative. She wanted to make this about my cruelty, about my silence. I didn't take the bait. "I am alive. I am well, and you have known exactly where I was because my name has been in the press," I said. "But we are not doing this tonight. This is Marcus's wedding. I am here to celebrate him." "We are your parents," Howard said. His voice was rough, confused. "You can't just stand there and talk about the weather. We are a family." "We will have a chance to discuss the definition of that word tomorrow," I said. "At the meeting with Ms. Harrington, tonight, I am just a guest." I turned my body slightly, signaling the conversation was over. Before they could respond, Lila appeared. She was breathless, her cheeks flushed. She looked beautiful in her bridesmaid dress, but there was a frantic energy to her movements that reminded me of a bird trapped in a house. "Naomi," she said. She looked at our parents, then at me. I didn't think you would come." "Hello, Lila," I said. My voice softened. I had never hated Lila. I pitied her. She was as much a victim of their obsession as I was, just in a different way. I was the one they starved. She was the one they force-fed until she choked. "I am sorry," she blurted out. Tears welled in her eyes. "About the graduation. About everything. I never wanted you to be alone that day. Mom said—" She trailed off, glancing nervously at Patricia. "It is okay, Lila," I said. "The graduation was 5 years ago. I am not angry at you for that. You were a kid doing what you were told." "But you are angry," Patricia interjected, her eyes narrowing. "You are angry and vindictive. That is why you are dragging us to a lawyer's office the day after a wedding, to punish us." "It is not a punishment," I said. "It is an accounting." I excused myself and walked toward the bar. I needed distance, but the family grapevine works faster than fiber optics. As I waited for a refill, my Aunt Sarah, one of Patricia's staunchest allies, sidled up to me. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You look expensive, Naomi," she said, eyeing my jumpsuit. "I work hard, Aunt Sarah," I replied. "That is what I hear," she said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "So, if you are doing so well, why are you causing this fuss about your grandfather's money? Your mom told us you are threatening to sue them. Really? After they raised you? It is just money. Honey, your sister needs it to keep the arts alive. Don't be greedy." There it was, the distorted reality. I turned to face her fully. "Is that what they told you? That I am suing for money?" "Well, aren't you?" "No," I said. "I am not suing for money. I am enforcing a legal will to ensure that the memory of the dead is respected. It is not about the cash. Aunt Sarah, it is about honesty. If they told you otherwise, you might want to ask yourself why they are so afraid of a simple reading of the records." She blinked, taken aback by the directness. I picked up my water and walked away. Marcus caught me near the edge of the dance floor 20 minutes later. The sun was down now, and strings of lights were glowing above us. "You doing okay?" he asked, leaning in. "I am surviving," I said. "The flying monkeys are out in force." Marcus grimaced. "Yeah, about that. I think you need to know the script they have been running." He looked around to make sure no one was listening. "For the last 5 years, whenever someone asked why you weren't at Christmas or Thanksgiving, Patricia had a story ready. She told everyone you were too important for us now. She said you skipped your own graduation because you had a high-level project and couldn't be bothered to walk." I let out a short, dry laugh. "Of course." "And the money," Marcus continued, his face tightening. "When the studio started tanking, and people asked why they didn't use the education trust, Patricia told everyone you had signed a waiver. She said you refused your share of Grandpa's money because you felt sufficient and wanted Lila to have it all. She painted you as this arrogant, detached benefactor who was too cool for the family inheritance." The final piece of the puzzle snapped into place. They hadn't just stolen the money. They had made me the hero of the theft to cover their tracks. They had used a fictional version of my success to subsidize their failure. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "That clarifies everything." "Give them hell tomorrow," he whispered, and then slipped back into the party. I needed air. I walked away from the music, toward the stone balcony that overlooked the darker, quieter side of the valley. I stood there, gripping the railing, breathing in the cool night air. The sound of footsteps on stone came from behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew the cadence. "You are enjoying this, aren't you?" It was Patricia. Her voice had lost the wavering, tearful quality she used in public. Now it was low, sharp, and venomous. I turned around. We were alone on the balcony. The party was a distant hum of bass and laughter. "Enjoying what?" I asked. "Seeing us squirm," she hissed. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. "You think you are so high and mighty with your fancy job and your lawyer, but you don't understand what is at stake." "I understand perfectly," I said. "You spent money that wasn't yours." "I spent it on your sister," she snapped, "because she needed it. You didn't need it. You were always going to be fine. You were smart. You could get scholarships. Lila needs help. The studio is all she has. It is her life." "So you stole from one child to prop up the other," I said. "It wasn't stealing, it was parenting." Patricia grabbed my arm. Her fingers dug into the silk of my sleeve. "Listen to me, Naomi. If you go into that room tomorrow and make this an issue, if you demand that money back, the studio goes under, the bank will foreclose, Lila will lose everything. Is that what you want? Do you want to destroy your sister?" It was the ultimate threat, the nuclear option. Be silent, or be the villain who ruins Lila. I looked down at her hand on my arm. Then I looked up into her eyes. "I am not destroying anything," I said. "I am just turning on the lights." "You are heartless," she spat. "No," I said. "I am just done paying for a show I never wanted to see." I pulled my arm away. Her grip broke. "If Lila's studio is built on lies, Patricia," I said, my voice steady and final, "then maybe it isn't as stable as you think, if the only way for her to succeed is for me to be robbed. Then she has already failed." Patricia stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, grasping for a weapon she no longer had. "See you tomorrow," I said. I walked past her, back toward the light and the music, leaving her standing alone in the dark with the truth she had tried to bury for 20 years. The conference room at Harrington and Associates was small, windowless, and smelled faintly of old paper and lemon furniture polish. It was a stark contrast to the sun-drenched vineyard where we had toasted Marcus and his bride less than 24 hours ago. A long mahogany table dominated the space. On one side sat my parents, Patricia and Howard. They looked exhausted, their wedding finery replaced by wrinkled casual clothes, their faces gray under the fluorescent lights. Lila sat next to them, staring at her hands, twisting the strap of her purse until her knuckles were white. On the other side sat the rest of the family, Aunt June, Uncle Ben, and 2 cousins who had delayed their flights home to witness this. And then there was me. I sat at the head of the table, not by arrogance, but by necessity. Ms. Harrington sat to my right, a stack of files arranged before her with military precision. The silence in the room was heavy. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a sentencing. "Let us begin," Ms. Harrington said. Her voice was dry and devoid of emotion. "We are here to settle the estate of Arthur Blake, specifically the outstanding matters regarding the Blake Family Education Trust, established in the year 2005. Patricia shifted in her chair. "Is this really necessary? Evelyn, can't we just sign the standard waivers and go home? We are all tired." "The waivers are not standard, Mrs. Blake," Harrington said, not looking up from her papers, "because the disbursements were not standard." She adjusted her glasses. "The terms of the trust were explicit," she continued, reading from a yellowed document. "The principal amount was to be divided equally between the 2 beneficiaries, Naomi Blake and Lila Blake, 50% each. Furthermore, upon the beneficiaries turning 18 years of age, any withdrawal required their co-signature." She paused and looked directly at Howard. "I have reviewed the transaction logs from the last 6 years. I see 34 separate withdrawals from the portion of the fund designated for Naomi Blake. I see 0 signatures from Naomi Blake." The room seemed to drop a few degrees in temperature. "Well," Howard stammered, clearing his throat, there was an understanding." "I have the withdrawal slips here," Harrington said. She slid a piece of paper across the polished wood. On every single slip, next to the signature line for the beneficiary, there is a note in Mrs. Blake's handwriting. It reads, "Naomi has refused funds. Naomi does not need assistance." Every head in the room turned to look at me. I didn't speak. I simply opened my leather folder. I pulled out a stack of printed emails and text messages. I placed them in the center of the table. "This is a printout of my inbox from my freshman through senior years at MIT, I said. My voice was calm, contrasting with the pounding of my heart. "You will see 12 separate requests from me asking for help with books, lab fees, and rent. You will see 12 refusals from Patricia stating that the family had no money." I slid another paper forward. "And this," I said, "is a text message from Mom sent 3 days after I requested $500 for a winter coat. It says, 'We just can't make it work right now. Sweetie?'" I pointed to the bank statement Ms. Harrington was holding. "On that same day," I said, looking at Patricia, You withdrew $2,000 from my trust fund. The memo line says Lila Costume Fittings. Patricia flinched as if I had slapped her. It was temporary, she cried out, her voice shrill in the small room. We meant to put it back. The studio was expensive. Naomi, you don't understand the costs of elite training. We were going to replace it once Lila got her contract. It was a loan. A loan requires permission. Ms. Harrington cut in. Taking money without permission is theft, and regarding the replacement of funds, according to these records, by the time Naomi graduated, her portion of the trust was depleted to less than $50. Lila's portion, however, remained untouched until last year. Because we were saving Lila's share for her future, Patricia argued, her logic twisting in on itself. Naomi was at MIT. She was already set. She was going to be a big engineer. She didn't need the crutch. Lila needed the safety net. So you cannibalized one child to feed the other, Aunt June said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a knife. Howard slammed his hand on the table. It wasn't a gesture of power. It was a gesture of desperation. Stop it, he shouted. You are making us sound like criminals. We are her parents. We made a judgment call. We always believed Naomi would be fine. She is the strong one. She never needed us to hold her hand. She is resilient. We knew she would survive without the money. The words hung in the air. She is the strong one. The room went dead silent. I looked at my father. That is it, isn't it? I asked softly. That is the justification, because I could survive the neglect. You decided I deserved it. Howard opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked around the room, seeking an ally, but found only cold, hard stares. The narrative they had built, the story of the sacrificing parents and the ungrateful daughter, was dissolving in the harsh light of the financial records. A cousin, the one who worked in accounting, spoke up. Uncle Howard, you told us Naomi refused the money. You told us she was too proud to take it, but you took it. You took it because you knew she wouldn't stop you. That is not parenting. That is exploitation. Patricia put her head in her hands. We just wanted Lila to have a chance, she sobbed. Is that a crime? To want your child to succeed? It is when you steal from your other child to do it. Ms. Harrington said. She opened the final file. Here is the situation, the lawyer said, clasping her hands. The estate is prepared to rectify this. The remaining assets, the land and the stock portfolio, will be liquidated. The proceeds will be used to reimburse Naomi Blake for the full amount of the misappropriated trust funds, plus interest calculated from the date of each withdrawal. The remainder of the estate will then be transferred to Naomi Blake as sole beneficiary, per the penalty clause for fiduciary misconduct. What? Lila gasped. Her head snapped up. But the studio, we need that money to pay the business loan. If you take the estate, the bank takes the studio. The studio, I said, looking at my sister, was paid for with my tuition money. Lila, it has been insolvent for 2 years. This money isn't going to save it. It is just going to prolong the lie. Lila looked at me. Then she looked at the spreadsheet on the table. She saw the dates. She saw the amounts. Paris intensive, New York audition, costume fee. She realized, in that moment, that her entire career, her entire identity as the precious talent, had been funded not by her parents' sacrifice, but by my theft. Her face crumpled. She didn't look angry. She looked ashamed. I didn't know, she whispered, tears spilling over. Naomi, I swear, they told me Grandpa left it for me. I know, I said gentle. I know you didn't know. Patricia looked up, her face streaked with mascara. You can't do this. Naomi, you have plenty of money now. You are rich. Why do you need this? Just to hurt us? Grandpa would never want this. He would want us to be a family. Grandpa wanted fairness, Ms. Harrington said. And frankly, Mrs. Blake, if we take this to civil court, The public record will include every single one of these transactions. Do you want the parents of your students to know how you finance your business? Patricia slumped back in her chair. The fight went out of her. She looked small. She looked defeated. "I thought," she whispered, "I thought it wouldn't matter. I thought nobody would check." "Grandpa is dead," she mumbled. "He wouldn't know." "He doesn't know," Ms. Harrington said, closing the file with a sharp snap. "But now everyone else knows. The family knows. And most importantly, Naomi knows." That was the sentence. That was the verdict. It wasn't a judge banging a gavel. It was the realization that they could no longer hide behind the curtain of good intentions. They were exposed. I stood up. I took the pen Ms. Harrington offered me. I signed the transfer documents. The sound of the pen scratching on the paper was the only sound in the room. I didn't feel a rush of triumph. I didn't feel happy. I just felt light. The weight of their expectations, the weight of their lies, the weight of being the strong one who had to carry the family's secrets, it was all gone. I capped the pen. "I am not doing this to destroy you," I said, looking at Patricia and Howard. "I am not doing this to ruin the studio. I am doing this because for 27 years, you told a story about me that wasn't true. You told the world I was cold and distant and didn't need you. You used that story to excuse everything you did." I picked up my purse. "I refuse to live in a story I didn't agree to," I said. "The tab is closed." I turned around. I walked to the door. "Naomi, wait," Howard called out, his voice cracking. I didn't wait. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. I heard the door click shut behind me, sealing them in that small, airless room with the piles of paper and the eyes of the family they had deceived. I walked out of the building and into the California sun. The air was fresh. The sky was a brilliant, impossible blue. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs, and for the first time in my life, the air didn't taste like what was left over after everyone else had breathed. It tasted like mine. Thank you so much for listening to Naomi's story. If you enjoyed this journey of justice and truth, please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts on how Naomi handled her family. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so more people can hear these stories of resilience.